Pag-start na.
Start na.
Hello, good morning everyone. I'm Heidi and I'll be reporting about environmental communication theories. But before we go into the theories, let me first just give a quick overview or a quick recap of what environmental communication is. So I'll be reading Sir Floor's definition. Environmental communication is the application of communication approaches, strategies, and techniques to environmental management and protection. Simply put, it is the deliberate exchange of environmental information, knowledge, and even wisdom. But today, I'll be focusing on a different definition, or not so different definition of environmental communication. I would like to put environmental communication as an emphasis on human-nature relationship. I would like to emphasize on human-nature relationship. And by human-nature relationship, I simply mean the human-nature dynamics, how nature affect the environment and vice versa. And we'll be discussing this more in depth as we discuss the environmental communication theories. Also, I would like to mention that the goal of the human communication is simply mutual understanding. We communicate to be understood. And as Ma'am Bench said last week, it is okay to agree to disagree. Mutual understanding doesn't always mean that we have to be on the same boat, on the same page, but we can agree to be on different sides of the coin, and it's okay. Okay, so from defining environmental communication, I will be defining theory. So this is my very short understanding of what a theory is. For me, theory is why we do the things we do. Theories hope to explain why we behave the way we do, why certain groups, why some organizations act or operate the way they do. And putting into context theories into vis-a-vis environmental communication theories, scholars who study environmental communication are particularly concerned with the ways people communicate about the natural world because they believe that such communication has far-reaching effects at a time of largely human-caused environmental crisis. So that's where you can put your anthropogenic climate change and anthropogenic other environmental issues. So in dealing with environmental communication, some other researchers have turned to existing theories. Like some researchers have turned to communication theories in looking at human-nature relationship. Some have used phenomenology in tracing back human origins from nature. So using the phenomenological lens, they can understand how and especially why people behave the way they do, why people in the long run are starting to lose concern for the environment. And of course, we can also use cybernetics theory and other theories. But today, I will be focusing on four theories, and I will be discussing another theory that is not in the outline. But I think it's a more encompassing theory to explain the other four theories that we'll be discussing. Okay, before I go into the environmental communication theories, I think it is important to mention that environmental theories undo the binary of human and nature. Instead, they try to represent and include nature in an effort to hear the interaction of the numerous voices of the ecosystem in which humans are a big part of. So, first I will be discussing the general systems theory, the first theory for the environmental communication theories. I think this was also discussed during my Ma'am Bench videos. So the GST or the General Systems Theory says that all living systems must communicate in order to survive. So communication is a means for survival. Humans communicate with each other and animals. And GST also states that culture and nature are not mutually exclusive, meaning they can coexist. They can be both present in one system, in one ecosystem, in one organization, in one instant. The general systems theory suggests three critical functions which were already mentioned by Ma'am Bench during her video. First is that the exchange of materials with its environment and with other living systems. There has to be an exchange between the environment and the other living systems. And the second is the exchange of energy with its environment and with other living systems. One simple example of this is the food chain. So we trace the food chain from the producers up to the decomposers. There is an exchange of energy. And energy can neither be created nor destroyed. It can only be deduced, increased, or be passed on to another. And that's the second function of the GST, that energy should be exchanged. There should be an energy exchange. And if we go into technical stuff, there are other cycles that we can see that there really is an energy exchange between humans, animals, and other living systems. And third is that the exchange of information with its environment and other living systems. Animals know when there's a strong earthquake coming. The nature communicates. I just do not know why the humans are the least or the last of the living systems that are last to know or last to decipher what it is trying to communicate. But these three functions, I think, as a theory, just helps us see that there should be an interaction between the humans and the nature, that the human cannot be fully separated from the nature. Because if you try to look at the ecosystem, if you try to study ecology, human is an integral part of the ecology of the ecosystem. Okay, so just to reiterate, general systems theory emphasizes the importance of human and nature interaction with each other, be it exchange of energy, be it exchange of information. There has to be an exchange, there has to be an interaction. Because human and nature, culture and nature are not mutually exclusive. So that's the general systems theory. Then next we go to the theory of Trinity of public participation. It was quite hard to find the sources for this, but theory of Trinity of public participation attempts to illustrate the role of applied theory in both planning and evaluating the effectiveness of participatory processes regarding contentious environmental issues. So we move on from the general systems theory and we go into the application of theory, of looking into how theories can affect, of how theories can be applied in decision making, in planning. Okay, so in discussing theory of Trinity of public participation, it is important that I mention the Trinity of voice, or as we call TOV. The literature would tell you much about the TOV. But in a nutshell, the TOV includes three main parameters or main elements. First is the access, second is the standing, and third is the influence. I will be discussing very briefly the three different elements. Access refers to the minimum resources that citizens needs to exercise fully their opportunity to participate. Okay. Are information materials available in the community? Are the community officers present anytime when the citizens or the stakeholders need information? So that's access, availability, and the minimum resources that we need in order to participate. And how can we participate? It's only by being informed. It's only if we know something about the issue that we have to participate in. The second is the standing. This is not a legal basis. Standing, simply put, is the perspective or the belief. But as the author says, it is the civic legitimacy, the respect, the esteem, and the consideration of the consideration that all stakeholders' perspectives should be given. So it's how we look at things, how we perceive things, how we perceive this environmental issue can affect us, can affect the greater community. And the last is the influence. It refers to the participants' opportunities to be part of a transparent process that considers all alternatives, opportunities to inform the decision criteria and thoughtful response to stakeholders' concerns and ideas. And I don't know if you've been exposed to different environmental programs, but I think this influence factor is often missing. But these three elements are very critical, as the theory of Trinity of public participation says, because the the absence of one element contributes to the lack of participation of the stakeholders. Many authors said that these three elements should all be present so that participants or stakeholders can participate and can have informed decision making, can have informed decision making process. And that this TOV, or this Trinity of Voice, can play an additional transformative role in building community capacity. So, in a nutshell, a theory of Trinity of public participation puts importance, of course, in public participation, in what? In the discussion of continuous environmental issues and the decision-making process. It hopes to bring voice to the humans who are affected, but also give them try to participate, also try to give them voice in how to decide. Do we need this? Do we need that? Can we do this? Can we do that? And I hope that the three elements of the TOV can be greatly put into practice, that we can consider the access, the standing, and the influence of the stakeholders. So from the Trinity of public participation, we move on to the next theory, the theory of self in practice. So if we discussed earlier the systems, the bigger picture, and then we go into public participation, we now trickle down to the theory of self in practice, which has been applied to everything from public participation in informing adaptive environmental management to exploring ways to understand a combat urban sprawl. And unlike the Trinity of public participation, theory of self in place highlights the importance of the shared sense of self, or sense of self in place. It highlights that the sense of self in place is a strong mediator in attending to or participating in environmental issues and discussions. I think it's simply put that what's in it for me? Does this environmental issue have a direct effect on me? Will I experience adverse effects? And I think that that's the very first step in trying to involve people. Because if people do not feel involved, if people do not feel affected, if people do not feel that there is a sense of shared effect in the community, of course they will not participate. But the theory of self in place just states that in the very first place, you should try to let the stakeholders, you should try to let the community feel that they have a place, that the environmental issue has a direct effect on them before they can finally get involved, and more so before they can finally act upon on any environmental issues. It was also mentioned that citizens or stakeholder senses of selves in place form the major link between how people appraise communication appeals and how they behave in the environment. Discussion focuses on the significance of the association between a sense of place, how the self gets related to the environment, and the sense-making related to conservation-oriented advocacy. So before we try to formulate communication campaigns, communication materials, first we have to know what is the sense of place of these people, how close is the issue with their hearts or with the community. Because just by then, we can try to decide how to package our communication campaign. Do we deal it person to person? Do we deal with it group by group? And I think this theory of self in place is a very vital theory of how we get to mobilize the people in acting upon a certain environmental issue. Okay, so I think one example of this theory of self in place, I think one example of the theory of self in place is that we have talked to many farmers in different locations nationwide, and most of the farmers feel compelled to change their current farming practices because they have a notion, they have a sense that their farms and their families will be greatly affected by the changing climate. So as a result, they attend to government projects, they attend to call for meetings from their LGUs, from their agricultural officers. They try to participate because they have a sense of place. They have a sense of immediate effect from the environmental issues, as compared to those farmers who still see climate change as merely a government project. Yeah, unfortunately, some farmers still see that climate change is one big project of the government to gain funds. But as we can see, we can trace it back from the previous theory, the Trinity of public participation. Maybe because they don't have enough access of information. Maybe they do not have enough concern from the LGU to educate them about the scientific explanations of the changing climate. And as part, they do not feel engaged. They do not have a strong stand. And of course, they do not want to participate in any of the government efforts with regards to climate change. The next theory is complexity theory. So we move on from the public participation to the self-in-place, and we go to the complexity theory. Complexity theory refers to the study of a complex system or complex systems. It has various applications such as complex theory and organizations, complexity economics, and complex adaptive systems. So complexity theory recognizes that the system before and during its functions have various complex processes in it. So that's what complexity theory wants to look at. We can also consider chaos theory to be one of the arms of complexity theory. Chaos theory is the study of behavior of dynamical systems that are highly sensitive to initial conditions. So we can also use this chaos theory in looking at public behavior to different environmental issues. And when applied to environmental communication, complexity theory can look into how different government agencies communicate environmental issues to its stakeholders. Before a press release, before a project gets approved, what are the events? What are the systems that they have to comply to before they can finally release these press releases or approve these government projects? The processes of involving the stakeholders in its initial discussions. Do we have that process in the program planning? Do we involve the stakeholders? We can also look at that. Or we can also look into how we do not include the stakeholders into planning and why we do not include the stakeholders into planning for government projects. So these complex systems, complexity theory puts importance to the different nitty-gritty details of the system and how it operates, why a system is such. So that's the goal of complexity theory. So complexity theory can also be used in looking at different environmental organizations, how each organization differ from one another, and what sets this environmental organization apart from the others. Why is this certain environmental group achieves more than the other? So the complexity of the systems, the complexity of the behavioral patterns of the staff, complexity theory can provide you the whys and the hows of such system. Okay, so just a recap, we have the general systems theory that states that culture and nature are not mutually exclusive, and we also have the theory of Trinity of public participation, which puts importance to public participation and how the three elements of the TOV should be involved before any stakeholder can participate. And then we also have the theory of self-in-place, which puts importance to the sense of place or sense of belonging, sense of effect to the stakeholders. And we also have the we also have the complexity theory. So that's the complexity theory, which looks into how complex and how the different sub-levels of the systems contribute to the wholeness of the system. And then the last theory that I will be discussing is the systems theory. Okay, systems theory is more discussed in the technical or in the natural sciences. Say for example, ecology, or in defining the ecosystem. Systems theory is the one that the scientists and the hard science people are much more talking about. Okay, systems theory was proposed in the 1940s by Robert Bertalanffy, and it was furthered by Ross Ashby in 1956, which gave birth to the introduction to cybernetics. System theory can simply be explained as the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So that's how ecosystem works. That's how ecology views nature and views nature vis-a-vis the human community. Systems theory, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. To better illustrate the systems theory, we can look at into the human body. You can look at yourself, okay? So if we cut off our arms, our hands, our legs, and we lay them down in the table, you cannot see the same Heidi talking right now. You cannot see the same Ma'am Bench discussing in class right now. Okay? But if we put them together, if we put the hands, we put the arms, the legs together, and we have the whole body that we have right now, we have what we call the emergent property. The emergent property is the new property brought about by putting together the different parts of the system. And so that's how it is with the systems theory. The whole, or the human being, or the human body that we have can only function as it is when it is put together. That's also how it is with nature. That's also how it is with environmental communication. I think that the different elements of the community, different elements of the environment should always be considered, always be put together as a whole before we can make any communication material. We have to look at it from a lens that views it that it's a system, that without the nature, without the environment, the human cannot function, and vice versa, that the nature cannot function its full purpose, that cannot give its full purpose without the humans. And systems theory as a lens to look at environmental communication simply implies that there is no dichotomy between nature and humans. We coexist at the same time. Thus, we need to have a holistic view at nature and humans, especially in making our communication campaigns. So that's system theory in a nutshell. Okay, so that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Okay, so given this pool of theories that we have discussed very briefly today, I hope that we understand why we have to discuss these theories. It is because this will ground us, this will help us see, this will, how do I put it? This will guide us, okay? In crafting our environmental communication campaigns, in our environmental communication materials. We have to understand the dynamics of the human and the nature, because after all, environmental communication is all about human-nature relationship. So given these different theories and perspectives, I hope that in the coming days and the coming months, we hope to better see how we can craft our messages, and understanding that human and nature cannot simply put in different plates. And that's all. Thank you.